Welcome to another Garage Time with Goody. Today what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be changing out the front CV axles in a 2011 Dodge Avenger 3.6 liter engine, front wheel drive. Now, even though I'm going to be doing both of these CV axles, I'm going to be doing the passenger side first because that's the one that usually gives me the most amount of trouble. Well, let's get to it. Okay, what you're going to want to do, you're definitely going to want to order replacement CV axles. These are from TRQ. I'm going to put the link in the video description. And if you're a beginner at this, you may want to label these axles. And I'm going to label this one. This is the front. I'm just going to go ahead and put FD on this one for front driver. That way I know this axle goes on the driver's side. And I'm going to put FP on this one. And this goes on the front passenger. But if you're a good old professional, then you can just look at them and know which is which. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little small flathead screwdriver and I'm going to take this center cap out of the rim. And that will reveal the CV axle. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is go ahead and saturate that with some PB Blaster. That way it will dissolve some rust. And this axle nut will be easier to break loose. I'm going to give that about 10 minutes to soak in and saturate. Okay, before I jack the car up with the jack, I'm going to go ahead and break this axle nut loose. I'm going to try it with a cordless impact. If that doesn't work, I'll use a breaker bar. And the socket you will be using is a 1 1/4 inch or 32 millimeter. Okay, that was no problem. The axle nut is loose. Okay, what I'm going to do now is jack this side of the car up on the opposite side that I'm working on. So I'm actually jacking the driver's side up, so that way you'll see later on in the video when I need to move that CV axle, this wheel will spin on this side too, so that I can line up the axle, put it in place, and take it off. So I'm gonna get this about 1 to 2 inches off the ground, and then I'm gonna put a jack stand underneath of it. The next step is to jack up the passenger side of the car and then to place the jack stand underneath of the car, and then you'll be ready for the next step. Okay, with the car in the air, I'm going to start taking off the lug nuts. Now this tire is good and loose, but if it wasn't, you could hit it at 12, 6, 3, and 9 until it pops loose. But this one is just going to come right off. And I'm going to set the tire out of the way. And I noticed something right off. You see right here on the inner part of the rim, there is some leaked out grease. And I suspect that is coming from the CV axle boot. What I'm going to be removing now is the brackets that hold on the hydraulic brake line and the ABS link and the ABS wire. And the reason I'm doing this is because once the wheel knuckle comes off, it's going to need to come forward, and you don't want to risk damaging either of those two hoses. Okay, right here I'm going to be taking off these two bracket bolts, and later on, if you don't know how these go back on, you can rewind the video to this exact spot and even pause it, and you'll see how this goes on and where these metal tabs go. By the way, this is a 13 millimeter socket that I'm using to take these off. There's going to be 2 bolts that you take off. Remember that the ABS bracket goes on the bottom, and it goes over top of this bracket that holds on the hydraulic brake hose. I'm also going to be taking off this metal bracket in the back, so it'll give me more slack to come forward. Okay, so those are out and out of the way. See the whole brake caliper. This is the caliper itself. And if you're going to change the brakes, you would take off this bolt and this bolt. But since we're taking the whole caliper off, back here, closer to the CV axle, this is the CV axle boot, you'll have this bolt and this bolt, and that will remove the whole caliper. And that's what I'm going to take off. Okay, on this vehicle, I'm going to be using a 3-inch extension with a 19mm socket. Hotter than the impact gun wants to come off, so I'm going to use a breaker bar. And then I'm going to, once I break the bolts, then I'm going to use the impact gun again. Okay, so those are broke loose. I'm going to get my impact gun, take those off. Now when you go to take out the second bolt that's holding this up, you're going to want to hold on to the caliper mount, because if not, you could have a chance of it just dropping and falling. We're going to pull this and wiggle it just a little bit. It'll come out. The brakes will be inside too. Now the next step I'm going to do, if you have a hanger bar or if you have a bungee cord, I'm going to hang this from the struts here, and that way I can move the caliper from the left to right as I work and move this out of my way. Okay, before you take these strut mounting bolts off, the two of them, you're going to want to take off your rotor, and it could be stuck on or it could just come right off. In my case, it's a little bit stuck on, so what I'm going to have to do is hit it in between the lug studs here. You do not want to hit it on the surface that the brakes use on the rotor. So you just keep hitting it about 5 to 10 pounds of pressure around in a circle. Now it's normal for dust and rust and everything to fly off. And as you can see, that just broke loose and it's going to come right off. So don't worry if it doesn't come off immediately. Then you go ahead and remove that axle nut. All right, now before you take the two mounting bolts out of the strut and the wheel knuckle, you will want to see that the axle itself is able to be pushed back. If not, we'll take a punch and tap it like that. But as you can see, this one looks pretty loose. In fact, it will go all the way back flush with this wheel bearing. So no problems at all. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to be taking off these two 21mm wheel knuckle to strut bracket bolts. Now there's going to be these bolts, the head of them always face toward the rear of the car, and the nut side always faces toward the front of the car. That's an easy way to remember that. So I'm going to have to use a wrench. make sure that as you're working, you keep the ABS and the hydraulic hose wire out of the way. And if for some reason you cannot hold this into place, it will just push down onto your rotor, and that will definitely be enough strength to hold it. But I'm not having any problems holding it. As you can see, there was a lot of rust there. So when I do take these off, I'm going to let them soak in a little bit of PB Blaster to dissolve some of that rust. The two mounting bolts out, make sure that you have plenty of slack in the ABS sensor wire. Now, as long as this is pushed all the way down to the left, you grab it by the metal bell here, you push in, and it has enough clearance. You can see this boot here is just busted. And look at all of this grease just leaking out.
What I'm gonna do next is right here. I have a pickle fork. They do make an official pulley for these, but you don't need one. I'm just going to use, like I said, I'm just going to use a plain pickle fork. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to try putting it up under here and prying against the outer part of the axle, and maybe even using a hammer to tap on it. If it doesn't want to come out, then what's going to happen is, since I jacked up the car on the other side, I'm able to turn this axle a quarter turn at a time. There is a retainer pin in there that's hanging down, and if it's not in the 12 o'clock position, it may have the axle locked in there and it's going to be harder to come out. But once you get this axle in the 12 o'clock position and that retainer is in the exact position, it's going to hang down and let this come out a lot easier. So that is why I jacked up the other side of the car, so that the wheel can turn. So we're just going to try it quarter turn at a time. It doesn't look like it's going to come off easy there, so I'm going to turn it just a quarter of a turn and put it back up under there. I'm going to turn it again. Now, this is still not easy peasy, but it is going to be a way that it's doable. It's a lot easier. Another quarter turn. Okay, I think I found the quarter turn, and I'm gonna be tapping this. Now, if you can see that, this right here, it has let go. I should just be able to tap this out.
Yeah, this one came off in two pieces. As you can see, this is part of the axle that goes inside the boot, and yeah, it really need to change bad. And this boot, this front boot, is also busted right there. So that's the old one, guys. Okay, this next part, you could ask 50 different people the same question, and hopefully most of them would give you this answer I'm about to give you. But I believe it is the right answer. A lot of people will ask, should you use your old axle nut or the new one? Most of the time, when you buy a new CV axle, you will get a new axle nut. The quick answer is you want to use the new one, because along with the old axle and the old axle nut, this has been under years of stress and compromise, and it will lose the structurability and the integrity. In simple terms, it may fail. But I have seen people use them over and over with no problem. But my personal opinion, use the new one. Okay, on the passenger side, you will see that it's going to insert itself into the metal shaft. I call this the female side. When I go to do the driver's side, it is going to be completely opposite. It's going to be the male side. But only on the passenger side, it's going to have this rubber O-ring that goes across the shaft here. In fact, you push it all the way back to the very back of the wall of the shaft. And it was there before. If you're asking if it's new or used, it is the one that was already there. I inspected it, it's in good shape, and you should definitely put it back. Okay, the trick into inserting or removing a CV axle without using a specialty or proprietary tool is this retention ring right here. If you can see this retention ring, it's going to have a space cut out in it. And what you want to do, you want to move that space to where it's positioned in the 12 o'clock position or straight up and down. Then what will happen, the retention ring will hang down on the shaft and it will be in the on-lock position. And then you can install your CV axle or remove it. Line up the splines, and just guessing, give or take, about 20 pounds worth of pressure here. You push on the metal boot, and I just felt it click in with that retention bracket. Now I'm going to move this slightly to the right so the bracket's not lined up, and then you'll want to pull back and forth to make sure that that's locked in. And in this case, it is indeed locked in. And I'm also going to look underneath the car to make sure it is flush up against the differential and the transmission. Turn this to the right or the left, but it should have enough clearance to go in. And watch these splines. Line these splines up with the splines in the wheel bearing, and it should just slide right in, just like that. Whenever you find it, whenever it goes in properly. And then you want to lift the wheel knuckle up to the mounting bracket, and you're ready to insert your mounting bracket bolts. Okay, so remember, you can adjust this mounting bracket because the bolts are not in it. I'm going to go ahead, insert the bottom bolt, and I'm going to insert the top bolt. I may have to push back a little bit on the wheel knuckle, but it should go right in. Remember, the top of the bolts are going to face the rear or the back of the car, and the other end where the nut goes on is going to face the front of the car. Now, as you can see, I'm going to go ahead and put these on by finger, and then these threads right here on this bolt, you're going to want to tap them with a rubber mallet or a hammer. Slightly tap on them. I'm going to get the 21 millimeter wrench and impact gun and get these on here. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to put the wrench end on the nut side, and I'm just going to basically not torque these down to spec yet. I'm just going to get them snug. I'm gonna go ahead and hand start this axle nut. Okay, got that on there. I'm gonna snug it down, not to torque spec yet. All right, here it goes. Okay, the next step is to go ahead and put this rotor on. It should just slide on over the lugs. Now, here is the tip that you want to do. Since this still has the brakes on here, you're going to want to make sure that this rotor lines up straight, and you're going to want to get these brakes and get this caliper to fit over top of that, and just push it on like so, and then you're going to be ready to hold it up with your hand, and you're ready to reinstall those two 19mm bolts. I'm going to tighten these two 19 caliper bracket bolts down. I got a 3-inch extension, 19mm socket. I'm going to snug it down, and then I'll get it to torque spec. Now we're going to be focused on these brackets here. You'll see there's a metal tab, and this is the bracket that it installs onto, and it's going to need one of those 13mm bolts, and I'm just going to get it started by hand. These don't require very much torque at all. Just barely snug it down, snug it down, and it'll be fine. And then this one, as you can see here, earlier it was on the bottom, but it can go on the bottom or the top right here. I'm just gonna go ahead and start it in the top one. As long as that tab goes in between the space. Just like that. And you'll wanna check your ABS line. Make sure it has a little bit of slack. Check your hydraulic hose, make sure it's okay. Let's not forget this tab in the back. This is going to have a metal tab here, and it goes into the body of the car. And then this has a 13mm bolt. I'm going to start by hand. Again, I'm just going to snug that down. Okay. Now another thing I'm going to do is take a quick glance at the dust shield, and I'm going to move the wheel, make sure I don't hear any scraping. And what that does is check for the dust shield to be bent in any place and rubbing up against the rotor, and it's not, so we are good to go. So I'm going to torque the strut bracket bolts, the two 21mm bolts, to 65 foot-pounds. Okay, got this set to 65 foot-pounds. Now I'm going to do the top. And this is a 21mm socket, by the way. Now we are ready to put the tire back on. I just want to make a note that I did clean out the inner part of the rim where it had all that grease. I used brake cleaner and some old rags. Looks a lot better. I'm gonna go ahead, mount the wheel back on. Just use my feet, push it up onto the lug studs. I'm gonna start these by hand. Another note, I know that I haven't torqued down the axle nut yet, but I'm gonna wait till I get the car on the ground to do that. It is gonna be torqued down to 118 foot-pounds. This is a 19mm socket that I'm using. I snug these down, and then later I'm going to torque them to 114 foot-pounds. And I'm going to tighten these diagonally so the rim will push up against the wheel bearing nice and smooth. I'm going to go ahead and remove the jack stands, and I'm going to do it on the passenger side first. Then I'm going to work my way over to the driver's side and take that jack stand out. Okay. Now what I need to do, I have a 1 1/4 or a 32 millimeter deep well socket with a torque wrench. I'm going to torque it down to 118 foot-pounds. Now if for some reason you don't have enough strength or leverage when doing this, you can attach a cheater pipe, but I should be able to do this. Okay, that is 118 foot-pounds. And we got one more thing to do, and that is to take this center hub piece, or the center cap for this rim, make sure it is on there, and just give it one tap, and then you are done. And that is how you replace the CV axle on the passenger side of a 2011 3.6 liter Dodge Avenger.